Welcome to Therapy Inspired podcast. As therapists, we have a unique view of the world. We hold a space for grief and trauma, and yet we also get to witness resilience and healing, all while being human ourselves. We hope to share helpful psychoeducation with our insights from our world as psychotherapists. And now a disclaimer. We'll be talking about things related to therapy. However, listening or engaging with this podcast does not equate to a therapist-client relationship. And while we may discuss insights from working with various clinical issues, we don't reference specific cases. Hi, my name is Darby Crosby. I'm a registered psychotherapist and on the Registry for Marriage and Family Therapy. I have a virtual clinic in Ontario where I see individuals, couples, and families. I also offer supervision services to other clinicians.
And I'm Kameela Osman. I'm a registered social worker and a psychotherapist. I have a practice in person in Bowmanville, Ontario, where I see individuals, couples, and families, and I do virtual therapy throughout Ontario. I also offer supervision services. Today on Therapy Inspired, we'll be talking about how to communicate effectively in relationships, making sure both partners feel heard and valued. In the next few episodes, we'll be focusing more on relationships, but today we'll start with communication. Effective communication in intimate relationships is a foundation for the relationship. It provides a safe space where both partners feel heard and understood. And so we'll be sharing some strategies for diving into that.
So one of the things that we need to be able to do is active listening. And in our fast-paced world, we tend not to really give people our full attention, put down the distractions, the phone, turn off the TV or whatever, so that we can really listen to what our partner is saying to us. Also using sort of the nonverbal cues to show our partners that we are listening and that we're paying attention, as well as looking at their nonverbal cues. Are they really upset about something? Are they about ready to cry? What? So that we can sort of be very aware of what they're feeling as well. And sometimes, if it's a really sort of emotional topic, sometimes it's really important to reflect back what your partner says. So I know it sounds somewhat stereotypical, but what I hear you say is, and then we can give our partner a little bit of a chance to say yes. And if I missed something, then my partner gets to say, and this as well. So then it's like, okay, fine, I've got the full picture. And we really want to sit and listen to the whole thing. I know that sometimes when we're in sort of conflict with our partner, or we're having a conversation that feels like we've had many times, I might listen to the first half as I'm forming my answer and not listening to the second half. So we really do need to listen all the way through, not interrupt, not pre-plan our next statement.
I don't know if you've tried this, Darby, in therapy. I'm sure you have with couples, that mirroring exercise where you get them to try to actively listen to a short statement and then repeat back what the other person said. Some couples can be resistant to it because it feels so scripted. But it's always interesting that when we pause and actually do active listening, you can see the difference in the interpretation. We're interpreting what's said, or as you said with that last bit, we're interrupting with our defense or our thoughts and feelings because we're stuck in that meta thinking. We're thinking while they're speaking instead of focusing on listening to what they're actually saying, listening to clarify and make sure we're absorbing. It's such an interesting exercise. Do you have thoughts on that exercise and what you see there?
Absolutely. It's what I also find very interesting is the whole thing that it's just a simple sentence, right? Sometimes I'll say, like, just sort of pretend you're asking your partner to get milk on the way home. And that's what the one partner will say, can you get milk on the way home? And then when I ask the other person, what did you hear? They may say, you need to do more work around the house, right? So that in actual fact, they weren't listening to the content as much as they were listening to sort of the feeling, oh, I have to do something else again.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to how we hear based off of what we're already feeling. And that's a
Right.
huge part of therapy, connecting those thoughts, feelings, and how it
Mhm.
links to the way that we respond. That kind of brings us to one other tip that I use very important one that's throughout therapy, whether it's individual therapy or couple, is using I statements when you want to feel heard. When we use I statements, we tend to almost disarm the defensiveness. We're talking about ourselves. We're not attacking the other person. As you can imagine, if I bring something up to my partner, let's say it's the dishes, and I say, you always leave the dishes. The second I say that, they're not hearing, about my feelings. They're not hearing why this was activating for me. They're not hearing my need or want. They're in defense mode. And so couples often get into a tit for tat struggle when we use that you language. And so I statements would look like what I am feeling. So I'm feeling frustrated because I spent time doing the dishes, even though I had 5 minutes before I left. And now I'm coming home and I'm meeting this full sink of dishes. I really wish that if you met the sink empty, that, you could try to make sure that I'm coming home to it empty or whatever the need and want is. It might be, even if it's a couple times a week, if you can do the dishes so it doesn't feel like it's always on me. And so yes, there's a little bit of a you in there, but you're naming what you're feeling. And when we start with the feeling, there's less room for arguing. You're naming, what's the situation a little bit, and then you're making a request. So it's not just I'm complaining to complain and you're just not a good partner. It's saying I'm feeling this and owning that it's my feeling. I'm naming the situation and I'm making a request. And the request may or may not be met. It's just a request. And so the person has room for, and you're opening up dialogue. It's not always possible, but this is what I can do. And then you start reaching a compromise from that place. Hopefully.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the next point, which is really validating what the other is feeling. So, if you're feeling frustrated because the sink is full of dishes again, um, I may not feel the same level of frustration as you, but by me sort of saying, I hear that you're really frustrated, I hear this is really difficult for you, it also decreases the defensiveness of the person making the request. So both of these sort of tips are ways that I can not make you defensive as well as, you can make me not feel defensive. So, it's really important that we are considerate of what our partners are trying to say, even if we don't necessarily agree with it, but it is important to validate that, right? Like I can say things like, I can see this is really important to you. And I think it's really important that we do say to our partners, and identify and validate their feelings as we have conversations.
With that, I'd say to be mindful of setting aside time for deep conversations. Sometimes couples will find that they're in conflict because you came home after a long day and the other person wants to start a intense conversation about a heavy topic. We want to be mindful of both people being in a context where they can hear each other and communicate that. So if you're not in a space, let's say you're the partner that is tired and at capacity to say, like, I am just at my bandwidth today. I don't think I can handle this conversation right now. Could we try tomorrow evening? Or, come up with a bit of a system. I often go back because I'm trained in level 1 and 2 of the Gottman method for couples therapy. I go back to their approach. They call it the state of the union. So having a weekly, and I know that's not always possible for every couple. And so I say adapt it to what makes sense for you, whether that's a weekly, a bi-weekly, a monthly meeting to talk about the state of the union, the state of your relationship. And it can be, at a time that makes sense for you. So 20 minutes perhaps instead of an hour or 40 minutes. Again, whatever works for you. But when we have those regular check-ins about intense stuff, there's less likeliness that things are going to pile up and then it's coming out, because this is what happens for a lot of couples. Those issues, those deep conversations that need to be processed, they're piling up. And when they're at a head, when we're frustrated with each other, now they're coming out and we're in disagreement. And so if we're having regular check-ins, and again, you can think of it like going to the dentist or having an appointment at the end of the day. If you know you have that appointment, your mindset's almost like saving a little bit of energy for that. But if you're at the end of the day and somebody calls you and says, you have to come out, you're going to feel like, I really don't want to go because you're going to try to activate when you
Mhm.
expected to be at that downtime. And so again, that bit of a plan. It doesn't have to be too rigid, but just a bit of a schedule. Let's try to make it a routine Wednesday evenings, Monday evenings, whenever makes sense for you, this regular time. You may notice that you save that bandwidth and then also prepare for it. So I ate, I showered. You both can talk about like what helps you be in a mindset to have these deep conversations and it can free up. So now we're having leisurely time that isn't filled with tension because we didn't get a chance to talk about the big stuff. I don't know if you've had that, seen
Yeah.
the Darby in couples where they do some of that. They're fighting on date night or fighting on
Right.
vacation because there's all this stuff piled up.
And I also, a lot of people will say like, okay, we need a timeout because this is getting a little bit too intense. And then
Mhm.
they don't get back to finishing that conversation, which is really important. Which leads us to the idea that we have to understand how our partners communicate, right? So sometimes, there are people who just have to sort of talk a lot and they use lots of words, right? Because that's the way they process. They need to sort of hear themselves think as they go through the things, so that everything sort of is on the table, so to speak. Whereas other people, it would be better if you just sort of gave me two words about what the issue is. I could go away and think about it, and then I could come back and we could talk about it. So we need to understand that our partner may not communicate in the same way as I do, and therefore we need to be able to understand that if they need a little bit of time to process, they're not ignoring us or they're not sort of avoiding the topic. It's just that that's what they need. And again, it's the same thing. Like if I've had a really busy day at work and people have been talking to me and screaming at me all day long, maybe I need an hour, before, we sit down and talk. Maybe I can come home and, I can just sort of say, hi, how was your day? Fine, fine. I need a half an hour. Sometimes if we can communicate that, it doesn't feel quite so much like you're avoiding having conversations or connection time.
Yeah. And with that, I'd say, to work at expressing appreciation regularly. So even if there is like a misalignment in that communication style, to let the other person know that you do see what they're doing, you do think positively of them. It may bridge some of that gap in the ways that the words may be lost. It may build in positive sentiment. You do also want to be mindful that when we sit down to have conversations, even if it's not that labeled scheduled time for heavier conversations or deeper conversations, that conversations aren't always about the problems that we're having. We're not always having that problem talk. We can sit and talk and it just be stress reducing. We're talking about our day and getting some of that friendship support from each other in our conversation. Or it can be about positive things. This thing happened today, or I'm really appreciative that you took out the garbage, or, and I know that sometimes I hear this from couples. I don't want to give appreciation for the things that should be done. And that often is a bit of a flag, like resentment has been building. What are the needs and wants that you've had? Perhaps it comes back to what Darby was saying, like you're in need of validation and you haven't felt like you got that validation and appreciation. So you're resistant to giving some of that. But it can really change the tone of a relationship when we start building in appreciations. I do appreciate even something as simple as about the communication. So I do appreciate how we were able to talk about this. I appreciate that you compromised with me on this. It builds in some of that good faith. And coming back to the State of the Union, not that it's the only way to do that scheduled appointment, but it does have a bit of that script where it starts with giving appreciations. And so you're starting, again, that deep conversation. There might be heavy stuff, but it's not, I don't want to go to this or I don't want to sit down to this because we're only talking about the problems. We're talking about, again, the state of the relationship. So what's going well in the relationship? Let's do more of that. Where are we struggling? And then what I like about the State of the Union is it actually ends with, and you can find blogs of this online if you type in State of the Union Gottman method, you'll find some scripts for how to do it, but it does end with a nice, like, what's one way that, I can help you feel more loved this week? Because it is typically weekly, but you can be bi-weekly, whatever is the frequency. That's a nice kind of sandwich way of making it feel like a lighter conversation.
Well, and I think that and we do this sort of appreciation with our children, right? Because we want them to keep repeating things that they're doing well. So thank you very much for taking your dishes to the dishwasher. And that's how we teach our children to be positive and confident and so on and so forth. So why can't we do it with our partner? Sometimes we get into these things like they're an adult, they should know how to do it. But
Yeah. And I think
we all
sometimes
need,
people, sorry, Darby, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, we all need support. We all need appreciation.
Yeah, yeah. I do think with that, that sometimes people will say like that kind of language or approach feels like I'm treating them as a child, whether it's I don't need another child from the sense of
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
partner saying that, or the partner receiving that may feel like they're treating me like a child and I don't want to be infantilized. And
Right,
so, I think it's that bit of recognizing it's not about treating them like a child, but working on motivation. You're not going to feel motivated if you haven't heard appreciation for the efforts that you're putting in. You're not going to feel like psychologically, you're not going to feel like repeating that behavior if you've been on top of the dishes for a week and really vigilant when that's
right.
hard for you because maybe it's not a skill set. And so you're doing all this work and you're not getting appreciation. It's not going to feel good. So it does make a difference.
And we have to be aware of our tone of voice. Like if we say to our partners,
Mhm.
thanks for doing the dishes, like that's not a sincere, compliment, right? It's like, thanks for doing the dishes. I was so happy that I didn't have to see dishes in the sink when I came home. Thank you very much, right? That's a very sincere, heartfelt kind of thing. And it allows us to feel a little bit closer. Like we did it when we were dating.
Yeah.
We should
And
still
I was
do
going
it
to
15
say
years
that we do
later,
it with
right?
friends. Yeah, we just drop some of that stuff.
And so, that also comes to sometimes when topics are really emotional or, you are disagreeing about something. I think, we do have to sort of set limits. Like if I'm starting to feel more frustrated because I feel like, we are just butting heads, we do need to stop, go our separate ways for 5, maybe 10 minutes, and then be able to come back to if we need to. But we always need to come back. We need to make sure that we do finish the conversation because we all have different tolerances. Was today a good day? I'm going to have a lot longer um, ability to sort of stay focused on that conversation, even though it's emotional. So I think that we do need to be able to keep ourselves what I call online so that we don't sort of start saying mean things to people because we're feeling frustrated or hurt.
And of course, we can be open to feedback, just even that mindset of this person isn't my adversary, they're my partner. Being willing to hear what the other person is saying. Sometimes I will say, even if the other person, doesn't say it in a perfect way, can we look under, let's say it's a critical or a judgmental statement, can we look under that and explore, is there a need and a want that's happening for them? Is there something that's activating that? And hear the little bit of feedback that might be there, because it might be that they've been trying to express this or did express this and it may not have landed with us. And so a little bit of splitting that difference where yes, they can maybe work on their way of speaking and their way of communicating their needs and wants, but can we also open up to hearing them in a different way and being willing to take that feedback, recognize it's for our relationship, and that we both want this. We both want and deserve a healthy relationship where we can communicate. And so, the same way we'd want them to receive feedback that we have of them, can we start, even if they haven't been, can we start that process by opening up
Mhm.
the feedback for ourselves, allow that room to evolve?
So thank you very much for joining us today. In a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about the intimacy equation, balancing emotional and physical connections. If you have any questions or comments about our topics, past or in the future, if you'd like to suggest something that we talk about, please send us an email at darbycamilla@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye for now.